The elevator dinged as it reached the 40th floor, and Morgan Curtis pressed herself against the back wall, clutching her coffee mug like a shield. She knew he would be getting on. James Calloway, CEO of Meridian Publishing, always boarded at the 40th floor at precisely 8:07 a.m. Their silent ritual had been ongoing for months: a nod, a smile, and then 23 floors of pretending they weren't hyper-aware of each other's presence. Morgan smoothed her navy pencil skirt and adjusted her cream blouse, trying to appear casual as the doors slid open. There he was, impeccably dressed in a charcoal suit that highlighted his broad shoulders, dark hair perfectly styled, jawline sharp enough to cut glass. "Morning," he said with that rich baritone that always made her stomach flip. "Morning," she replied, offering the same polite smile she had been giving him for exactly 4 months and 6 days. James took his usual spot at the opposite corner, maintaining the professional distance that had characterized their elevator encounters since Morgan joined Meridian as their new senior editor. The tension between them was unmistakable, an electric current that neither acknowledged. As the elevator descended toward the lobby, Morgan allowed herself a quick glance at his reflection in the mirrored walls. To her surprise, she caught him looking at her too. For the briefest moment, their eyes locked in the reflection before both quickly looked away. When the elevator reached the lobby, James did something unprecedented. Instead of his customary nod before striding away, he hesitated, clearing his throat. "Excuse me," he said, making Morgan turn back in surprise. "I was wondering if you might want to grab coffee sometime." Morgan blinked, certain she had misheard. The James Calloway, whose publishing empire had revolutionized the industry, was asking her out. After months of these silent elevator rides, he had finally spoken more than a one-word greeting. "Coffee," she repeated, her heart suddenly racing. "Yes, unless you don't drink coffee, in which case tea, or lunch." Or he stopped, looking uncharacteristically flustered for a man whose face had graced the cover of Business Monthly's 30 Under 40 issue. Morgan surprised herself with her answer. "Yes," she said with a genuine smile, not the polite one she had been giving him for months. "I'd like that." The look of genuine surprise that crossed James's face was something Morgan would remember for years to come. He hadn't expected her to say yes, and somehow that made her even more certain of her answer. Morgan had been at Meridian Publishing for just over 4 months. After working her way up through smaller publishing houses, landing the senior editor position at one of the country's most prestigious publishers had been a dream come true. The company occupied the entire building's 63 floors of literary magic in the heart of New York City. When she first started, she had no idea that the reserved man in the expensive suits who rode the elevator with her was actually her boss's boss's boss. It wasn't until her 3rd week, when she spotted his portrait in the company's wall of leadership, that she realized she had been sharing her morning commute with the publishing mogul himself. "Tomorrow?" James asked, pulling a business card from his inside pocket. "There's a little place around the corner that makes exceptional espresso." "Say 9, Morgan nodded, accepting his card. "9 it is." As they parted ways in the busy lobby, Morgan clutched the business card with his direct number scrawled on the back. She had just agreed to have coffee with James Calloway, and judging by the curious glances from coworkers passing by, their exchange hadn't gone unnoticed. Back at her desk, Morgan's assistant, Penny, rushed over with wide eyes. "Was that James Calloway I saw you talking to in the lobby?" Morgan tried to appear nonchalant. "Yes, we're having coffee tomorrow." Penny nearly dropped the manuscripts she was carrying. "Coffee? With the CEO? Morgan, do you know how many women in this building would kill for that opportunity?" He never socializes with employees. It's just coffee, Morgan said, though her racing heart suggested otherwise. He's not just rich and powerful, you know. The man donates millions to literacy programs and funds scholarships for underprivileged writers. And have you seen his TED talk about democratizing publishing? I swear I watched it 5 times. I haven't, Morgan admitted, though she had certainly Googled him after discovering who he was. And I'm sure it's nothing. Maybe he wants to discuss the Blackwell manuscript. Penny gave her a knowing look. Sure, the manuscript. That's definitely why he was looking at you like you're the last cookie in the jar. Morgan rolled her eyes, but secretly, she hoped Penny was right. That evening, Morgan spent an embarrassing amount of time choosing her outfit for the next day. Professional, but not stuffy. Attractive, but not trying too hard. She settled on a burgundy dress with a tasteful neckline and a belted waist elegant enough for work, but with just enough style to suggest she had put some thought into her appearance. Sleep was elusive that night as Morgan replayed their brief conversation, and wondered what had prompted James to finally break their ritual of polite silence. She had caught him looking at her in the elevator before, but she'd assumed it was simple curiosity or coincidence. The next morning, Morgan arrived at work earlier than usual, her stomach a knot of nerves. She had deliberately avoided the 807 elevator, not wanting to face James before their coffee date if that's what it was. At precisely 8:55, she left her office and headed to the ground floor. The coffee shop, Brewology, was a small, artisanal place that somehow managed to survive despite being surrounded by larger chains. James was already there, sitting at a corner table with 2 cups in front of him. He stood when he saw her, and Morgan noted with satisfaction that he looked just as nervous as she felt. "I hope you don't mind, I ordered for you," he said as she approached. "An Americano with a splash of cream. I've noticed that's what you have in your mug most mornings." Morgan was touched that he had paid attention to such a small detail. "Thank you, that's perfect." As she sat down, Morgan couldn't help but notice how different he looked in this setting, more approachable, less the intimidating CEO and more just a man having coffee with a woman he found interesting. "So," James began, "I should probably explain why I asked you here." Morgan braced herself, half expecting him to reveal some work-related reason. "The truth is," he continued, his deep voice lowered slightly, "I've wanted to talk to you properly for months now. Our elevator rides have become the highlight of my mornings." Morgan felt a blush creep up her neck. "I thought I was just another employee you were being polite to." James smiled, a genuine expression that transformed his usually serious face. "I knew who you were the moment you joined Meridian. Your reputation preceded you. The Tennyson biography you edited last year was brilliant work." Morgan was surprised. "You read that?" "I make it a point to know who the rising stars in publishing are. When I heard you were leaving Barrett Press, I personally approved your hiring." "I had no idea," Morgan said, sipping her coffee to hide her surprise. "I assumed it was just the normal hiring process." "It mostly was," James assured her, "but I've been following your career for a while. Your editorial instincts are exceptional." Their conversation flowed easily after that, moving from work to books they loved, authors they admired, and eventually to more personal topics. Morgan learned that James had built Meridian from a small family publishing house he inherited from his grandfather into the powerhouse it was today. He spoke with passion about literature, and with surprising vulnerability about the pressure of running such a large company. "Most people see the success," he admitted, "but not the sleepless nights or the constant worry that one wrong decision could affect thousands of employees." Morgan nodded, understanding the weight of responsibility he carried. Is that why you're always the first one in and the last to leave? James looked surprised that she had noticed. Partly, but I also genuinely love what I do. Though lately, I've been wondering if I've let the business consume too much of my life. Hence the coffee date, Morgan ventured. His eyes met hers, warm and sincere. Hence the coffee date, though I should clarify I didn't ask you out because you work for Meridian. In fact, that's why I hesitated for so long. Company policy, Morgan asked, already knowing about Meridian's strict rules on workplace relationships. Exactly. But then I realized I could either keep admiring you from across an elevator or take a chance and see if there's something here worth exploring. He gestured between them. Even if it means we have to be discreet. Morgan considered his words carefully. Dating the CEO would certainly complicate her professional life, but there was no denying the connection between them. I'd like to explore this too, she admitted. But I don't want special treatment at work. I've worked too hard to have people think I'm advancing because of who I'm dating. James nodded seriously. I completely respect that. At work, we maintain professionalism. No one needs to know until we figure out what this is. As their coffee date extended well beyond the planned hour, Morgan found herself genuinely enjoying James's company. Behind the powerful CEO exterior was a thoughtful, well-read man with a surprisingly sharp sense of humor. When they finally returned to the office, they rode the elevator up together, maintaining the same polite distance they always had, but now with a shared secret that made Morgan's heart race. Same time next week, James asked quietly as the elevator reached her floor. I'd like that, Morgan replied with a smile before stepping out into the corridor. Feeling like she was floating over the next few weeks, Morgan and James developed a routine. Coffee dates every Thursday morning at Brewology, careful not to arrive or leave together, always maintaining a professional facade at work. Their elevator encounters continued, but now filled with the delicious tension of their secret. During one of their coffee dates, James confessed that he had first noticed Morgan on her very first day. You were arguing with security because they wouldn't let you in without your ID badge, he recalled with a laugh. You were so passionate about getting to your first editorial meeting on time that you threatened to call the CEO directly. Morgan groaned, covering her face with her hands. I had no idea who you were when you intervened. I know, James said, his eyes crinkling with amusement. That's what made it so refreshing. You thanked me and rushed off without trying to impress me or ask for anything. It was real. Their connection deepened with each meeting. James shared stories of growing up with the pressure of eventually taking over the family business, while Morgan told him about her childhood in a small town where the local library had been her sanctuary. My parents thought reading was a waste of time, she explained during their 5th coffee date. My father wanted me to take over his accounting firm. He still thinks publishing is just a phase I'm going through. James reached across the table to take her hand, a gesture that sent warmth spreading through her. Their loss is literature's gain. By the 6th week of their secret relationship, stolen moments in coffee shops no longer seemed enough. After one particularly engaging conversation about the future of digital publishing, James hesitated before making a suggestion. I know we agreed to keep things discreet, but would you consider having dinner with me? There's a place in Brooklyn, far from the publishing crowd. We could actually spend an evening together without watching the clock. Morgan smiled, squeezing his hand. I'd love that. That Friday night, Morgan took extra care with her appearance, choosing a sleek black dress that was worlds away from her work attire. When James picked her up in a sleek but understated car, his appreciation was evident in his gaze. You look incredible, he said, his voice slightly rough. "You clean up pretty well yourself," she replied, taking in his tailored navy suit that made his blue eyes even more striking. The restaurant, a small Italian place tucked away on a quiet Brooklyn street, was intimate and romantic without being ostentatious. James had reserved a private corner table, and as they settled in with glasses of wine, Morgan felt a shift in their relationship. "I have a confession," James said after they had ordered. "I've been wanting to ask you out since that first week I saw you, but I kept talking myself out of it." Morgan raised an eyebrow. "For 4 months," he laughed, running a hand through his dark hair in a gesture she was coming to adore. "I know how it looks. The CEO asking out a new employee. I didn't want to make you uncomfortable or have you feel pressured." "So what changed?" Morgan asked, genuinely curious. James's expression softened. "I overheard you in the cafeteria one day, defending a manuscript everyone else was ready to reject. You were so passionate, so committed to giving that author a chance. I realized I could either keep admiring you from afar or take a risk." "I'm glad you took the risk," Morgan admitted. As dinner progressed, they talked more freely than they ever had in their coffee shop meetings. Without the constraints of time or the fear of being seen by colleagues, they discovered more layers to each other. James shared his dream of eventually stepping back from day-to-day operations to focus on a literacy foundation he wanted to establish, while Morgan confessed her aspiration to one day lead Meridian's fiction department. "You'd be perfect for that," James said without hesitation. "Rosemary is retiring next year and they haven't found a replacement yet." Morgan shook her head firmly. "If that ever happens, it has to be because I've earned it, not because of us." James looked at her with admiration. "That's one of the things I respect most about you, your integrity." As they shared dessert, a tiramisu that the chef insisted they try, James's phone buzzed repeatedly. He apologized and checked it briefly. "Everything okay?" Morgan asked, noting the slight furrow in his brow. "Just a situation with one of our international offices." "Nothing that can't wait until tomorrow." He put the phone away and focused his attention back on her. "I'm sorry about that. One of the downsides of my position, it's hard to ever be fully off the clock." Morgan appreciated his honesty and his effort to be present with her despite the demands of his job. It showed a respect for her time that spoke volumes. After dinner, they walked along the Brooklyn promenade, the Manhattan skyline glittering across the river. The night was cool, and when Morgan shivered slightly, James didn't hesitate to slip off his jacket and place it around her shoulders. "Very chivalrous," she teased, though she was touched by the gesture. "My mother would accept nothing less," he replied with a smile. "She raised me to believe that how you treat others reflects your character, not your bank account." As they reached a quiet spot overlooking the water, James turned to face her. The moonlight cast soft shadows on his face, making him look younger, less burdened by responsibility. "Morgan," he said softly, "I know we've only been doing this for a short time, but I want you to know that this isn't casual for me. I care about you." Morgan felt her heart race. "It's not casual for me either." When he leaned down to kiss her, it felt like the natural culmination of months of silent attraction. His lips were soft against hers, the kiss gentle at first, then deepening as she responded. Morgan felt herself melting into him, her hands finding their way to his shoulders. When they finally pulled apart, both slightly breathless, James rested his forehead against hers. "I've been wanting to do that since the first time you smiled at me in the elevator." Morgan laughed softly. "That was my professional smile. If I'd known who you were, I probably would have been too intimidated to smile at all." "Then I'm glad you didn't know," he murmured, brushing a strand of hair from her face with a tenderness that made her chest tighten. The drive back to Morgan's apartment was filled with comfortable conversation and occasional glances that spoke of their deepening connection. When they arrived, James walked her to her door, a gentleman to the end. "When can I see you again?" he asked, his hand warm against the small of her back. "I'm free tomorrow," Morgan replied, surprising herself with her eagerness. "Unless that's too soon," James's smile was answer enough. "Not too soon at all. Breakfast. I make a mean French toast." Morgan raised an eyebrow. "The CEO of Meridian Publishing cooks." "I contain multitudes," he replied with a grin. "Besides, my grandfather believed every man should know how to cook at least 3 meals exceptionally well." "In that case I accept," Morgan said, standing on tiptoe to kiss him goodnight. "Text me your address." As she closed her door behind her, Morgan leaned against it, a smile spreading across her face. She had just had the best date of her life with a man who was not only successful and intelligent, but also kind and genuinely interested in her as a person, not as an accessory to his success. The next morning, Morgan arrived at James's address, a penthouse in a discreetly upscale building with a doorman who clearly recognized her name when she gave it. The elevator ride up to the top floor gave her a moment to calm her nerves. This was their first time meeting outside of the carefully controlled environments of the coffee shop or restaurant. When James opened the door, Morgan was struck by how different he looked in casual clothes, jeans, and a soft Henley that showed off his athletic build better than any suit could. The apartment behind him was spacious but not ostentatious, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a breathtaking view of Central Park. "You're right on time," he said, ushering her in with a quick kiss that felt wonderfully domestic. Morgan followed him into the kitchen, where the ingredients for French toast were already laid out. "Can I help with anything?" "You can pour the coffee," James suggested, nodding toward a high-end espresso machine. "I've already got it brewing." As they moved around the kitchen together, Morgan was struck by how natural it felt. James was as methodical in cooking as he likely was in business, measuring ingredients precisely and explaining his technique as he worked. "The secret is letting the bread soak long enough," he told her as he dipped thick slices of brioche into the egg mixture. "Most people rush it." Morgan sipped her coffee, watching him work. "Where did you learn to cook?" "My grandmother, actually," James replied, a fond smile crossing his face. "After my parents divorced, I spent summers with my grandparents. My grandfather ran the publishing house, and my grandmother ran everything else, including the kitchen. She believed food was love made visible." The meal, when they finally sat down to eat it, was indeed exceptional, crisp on the outside, custardy within, topped with fresh berries and real maple syrup. "This might be the best French toast I've ever had," Morgan admitted after her first bite. "Your grandmother taught you well." "High praise from someone who once told me they judge a restaurant primarily on its breakfast offerings," James teased, referencing a conversation from one of their coffee dates. After breakfast, they moved to the living room where bookshelves lined one entire wall. Morgan immediately went to examine his collection, noting with approval the diverse selection of titles, from classics to contemporary works, many from Meridian's catalog but plenty from other publishers as well. "I'm impressed," she said, running her fingers along the spines. "This isn't just for show." James came to stand beside her. "Books were my first love, publishing came later." Morgan pulled out a well-worn copy of To Kill a Mockingbird. "First edition, my grandfather's," James confirmed. "He gave it to me when I graduated college. Said it would remind me that publishing at its best is about more than commerce, it's about changing hearts and minds." "Wise man," Morgan commented, carefully replacing the book. "He would have liked you," James said softly. He believed in publishing voices that needed to be heard, not just ones that would sell. "Is that why you approved the Marcela Rodriguez manuscript?" Morgan asked, referring to a controversial memoir by an undocumented immigrant that Meridian was publishing despite potential backlash. James looked surprised. "You know about that? I'm on the editorial team," Morgan reminded him. "We were all shocked when it got the green light given the current political climate." "It's an important story," James said simply. "Worth the risk." Morgan felt a surge of admiration for him. In an industry increasingly focused on bottom lines, James's commitment to publishing meaningful work, even at potential cost to the company, was refreshing. They spent the rest of the day together, talking, reading, and eventually ordering takeout when they realized they'd been so engrossed in conversation that they'd forgotten about lunch. As evening approached, Morgan reluctantly checked her watch. "I should probably head home," she said, though she was reluctant to leave the comfortable bubble they had created. "Stay," James said, then quickly clarified, "just to watch a movie or something." "No pressure." Morgan hesitated, then nodded. "A movie sounds perfect." They settled on the couch to watch a classic film, and Morgan found herself gradually relaxing against James's side, his arm around her shoulders feeling like the most natural thing in the world. By the time the credits rolled, she was struggling to keep her eyes open. "You're falling asleep," James observed with a gentle smile. "Let me drive you home, or I could stay," Morgan suggested, surprising herself with her boldness. "If the offer's still open." The look in James's eyes was a mixture of desire and tenderness. "Are you sure?" In answer, Morgan leaned up to kiss him, a kiss that quickly deepened. When they finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, James rested his forehead against hers. "I've been trying to take this slow," he admitted. "I don't want you to think this is just about," Morgan silenced him with another kiss. "I know exactly what this is about," she assured him, "and it's not just physical for me either. But I do want you, James." His response was immediate and passionate, lifting her into his arms with surprising strength and carrying her to the bedroom. What followed was a night of discovery, tenderness, and an emotional connection that transcended the physical. In the morning, waking up in James's arms felt like the most natural thing in the world. As sunlight filtered through the blinds, casting golden stripes across the bed, Morgan studied his face in repose, the strong lines softened in sleep. When his eyes opened, the warmth in them as he gazed at her made Morgan's heart swell. "Good morning," he murmured, voice rough with sleep. "Morning," she replied, unable to keep the smile from her face. "No regrets?" he asked, a hint of vulnerability in the question. Morgan shook her head. "None whatsoever." The weekend passed in a blissful bubble, with James and Morgan barely leaving the apartment except for a brief walk in the park and to pick up groceries for the dinner. James insisted on cooking for her on Sunday night. They talked for hours, made love, and simply enjoyed being together without the constraints of their professional lives. But Monday morning brought reality crashing back. They had agreed to maintain their professional distance at work, which meant separate arrivals and the return to their elevator ritual of polite nods and restrained smiles. Walking into the Meridian building separately from James felt strange after their intimate weekend, but Morgan understood the necessity. Office relationships were complicated enough without adding the power dynamics of her dating the CEO. By Wednesday, however, rumors had begun to circulate. Morgan noticed whispers when she entered the break room and caught curious glances from colleagues. When Penny appeared at her office door with an unusually serious expression, Morgan braced herself. "Is it true?" Penny asked without preamble, closing the door behind her. "Is what true?" Morgan replied, playing for time. "You and James Calloway." Penny's tone made it clear she already knew the answer. "People are talking, Morgan," Morgan sighed, setting down her pen. "How did anyone find out? You were seen at Brewology multiple times. And apparently, someone from the fiction department lives in James's building and saw you there on the weekend." Penny sat down across from her. "I'm not judging, but you should know that Rebecca in HR is on the warpath. She's citing the company policy on disclosure of relationships." Morgan felt a sinking feeling in her stomach. The company policy required employees to disclose romantic relationships, particularly when there was a supervisory element involved. The CEO dating a senior editor definitely qualified. "We were going to disclose it," Morgan said defensively. "We just wanted to be sure it was serious first." "And is it?" Penny asked, her expression softening. "Serious, I mean." Morgan couldn't suppress the smile that crossed her face. "Yes, very." "Then you need to make it official before HR comes knocking." "The policy doesn't forbid relationships, it just requires transparency." Morgan nodded, reaching for her phone. "I'll text James now." The response came almost immediately. "Meet me at my office, 3 p.m. When Morgan arrived at the executive floor, a place she rarely had reason to visit, James's assistant, a formidable woman named Deanne, gave her an appraising look before picking up her phone. "Miss Curtis is here to see you, Mr. Calloway," she announced, then nodded toward the imposing double doors. "You can go right in." James was standing by the window when Morgan entered, his expression troubled. The office was exactly what she would have expected, spacious but not flashy, with shelves of books and industry awards tastefully displayed. "You heard?" she asked as he turned to face her. "Rebecca from HR paid me a visit this morning," he confirmed, moving to meet her in the middle of the room. "I'm sorry, Morgan. I thought we were being discreet." "Apparently not discreet enough," she replied with a rueful smile. "What happens now?" James gestured for her to sit on one of the leather sofas near the window. "Now we officially disclose our relationship as per company policy." "I've already drafted the form." Morgan raised an eyebrow at his efficiency. And then we continue as we have been, but without the sneaking around." James sat beside her, taking her hand. "Unless you're having second thoughts." "No," Morgan said firmly. "I just don't want this to affect my position here. I love my job, James." "It won't," he promised. "In fact, I've been thinking about how to ensure there's no conflict of interest. I've spoken with the board about recusing myself from any decisions related to your department or promotions. Your career at Meridian will progress based solely on your merit." Morgan was touched by his thoughtfulness. "You've already talked to the board." "I wanted to be prepared." James squeezed her hand. "This relationship is important to me, Morgan. I'm willing to do whatever it takes to make it work without compromising your professional integrity." They signed the disclosure form together, and James called Deanne in to witness it and take it to HR. The older woman's expression remained impassive, but Morgan thought she detected a hint of approval in her eyes as she took the document. "That's that, then," James said once they were alone again. "Official." Morgan felt a strange mix of relief and anxiety. "How do you think people will react?" "There will be talk," James acknowledged, "but it will die down. People always find something new to gossip about eventually." He was right about the talk. The next few weeks brought curious looks, whispered conversations that stopped when Morgan approached, and the occasional direct question from bolder colleagues. But true to James's prediction, the novelty gradually wore off as people realized that neither Morgan nor James was behaving any differently at work. Their relationship, meanwhile, continued to deepen. They settled into a comfortable routine, spending most weekends together, and the occasional weeknight when James didn't have business dinners or Morgan wasn't working late on a manuscript. They were careful to maintain professional boundaries at work, rarely even taking the same elevator unless others were present. 3 months into their relationship, James invited Morgan to accompany him to the annual Publishing Industry Awards, a black tie event that brought together the biggest names in the business. It would be their first public appearance as a couple in the publishing world. "Are you sure?" Morgan asked when he extended the invitation. "It's making quite a statement." "I'm sure," James replied without hesitation. "Unless you're not comfortable with it," Morgan considered the implications. "It's not that. I just don't want to be seen as trading on our relationship." James's expression softened with understanding. "Morgan, anyone who knows your work knows you're at that gala on your own merit. The Tennyson biography is nominated for Best Nonfiction, and you were its editor. You'd be invited regardless of who you're dating." His words reassured her, and on the night of the gala, Morgan felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness as she prepared. She had splurged on a midnight blue gown that made her feel elegant and confident, a necessary armor for facing the industry's elite on James's arm. When he picked her up, the appreciation in his eyes was reward enough for the investment. "You look absolutely stunning," he said, his voice dropping to a reverent tone. "You're not so bad yourself," Morgan replied, taking in his perfectly tailored tuxedo. "Very James Bond." The gala was held at the New York Public Library, its grand spaces transformed for the evening into a glittering venue filled with publishing royalty. As they walked in, Morgan was acutely aware of the heads turning in their direction, the curious glances and whispered comments. James, sensing her tension, placed a reassuring hand at the small of her back. "Ignore them," he murmured. "They'll find someone else to talk about soon enough." Throughout the evening, James introduced Morgan to industry luminaries, not as "my girlfriend," but as Morgan Curtis, the brilliant editor behind the Tennyson biography, always emphasizing her professional accomplishments. His pride in her work was evident, and Morgan found herself relaxing as conversation after conversation focused on her editorial projects rather than her relationship status. When the Tennyson biography won its category, Morgan watched from her seat as the author thanked her from the podium, calling her the editor every writer dreams of, insightful, challenging, and utterly committed to the truth of the story. James squeezed her hand under the table, his eyes shining with pride. "He's right, you know," he whispered. Later, as they danced during the gala's closing reception, Morgan felt herself truly at ease for the first time since their relationship became public knowledge. "Thank you for tonight," she said as they swayed to the music. "For everything." James's arms tightened slightly around her. "What are you thanking me for? For being so supportive? For understanding why my career matters to me? For never making me feel like I have to choose between my work and our relationship?" James looked into her eyes with an intensity that made her breath catch. "I would never ask you to make that choice, Morgan. Your passion for your work, your dedication to your authors, it's part of who you are, part of what made me fall in love with you." The words hung between them, the first time either had used the term love. Morgan felt her heart racing as she processed what he had said. "You love me?" she asked softly, needing to hear it again. James smiled, a gentle, vulnerable expression she rarely saw in the confident CEO. "I do. I love you, Morgan. I think I have since I first heard you arguing with security about the importance of that editorial meeting." Morgan laughed, tears pricking at her eyes. "I love you too," she replied, the words feeling both momentous and like the most natural thing in the world. Their kiss, there on the dance floor surrounded by the elite of the publishing world, sealed the declaration. Morgan no longer cared who was watching or what they might think. All that mattered was this man, this moment, and the future they were building together. In the months that followed, Morgan and James's relationship continued to strengthen. They weathered the occasional industry gossip with grace, and Morgan's reputation as an editor of exceptional talent only grew stronger. Silencing any who might have suggested her success was due to her relationship. When Rosemary, the head of Meridian's fiction department, announced her retirement, Morgan was on the shortlist of potential replacements. True to his word, James recused himself from the selection process entirely, leaving it to the board and the editorial director. The night Morgan received the call offering her the position, she rushed to James's apartment, breathless with excitement. He opened the door to find her beaming, a bottle of champagne in hand. "I got it," she announced, stepping into his arms. "Fiction department head. And I know you had nothing to do with it, because Gerald told me the board vote was unanimous." James spun her around in celebration, his face alight with joy for her. "Of course it was unanimous. You're the best editor at Meridian." As they toasted her promotion, Morgan reflected on how far they had come since those silent elevator rides, how a simple yes to coffee had changed the trajectory of her life. "Remember when you asked me out that first time?" she mused, curled against him on the sofa. "You looked so surprised when I said yes." James laughed, running his fingers through her hair. "I had convinced myself you were just being polite with those elevator smiles. I thought for sure you'd turn me down." "Why did you ask that particular day?" Morgan had always wondered about his timing. James looked slightly embarrassed. "I overheard you in the break room, talking about a blind date your friend had set up for the weekend. The thought of you dating someone else finally gave me the push I needed." "Well, I'm glad it did," Morgan said, leaning up to kiss him. "Best decision I ever made, saying yes to coffee with you." A year after their first date, James took Morgan back to the Brooklyn promenade where they had shared their first kiss. The night was cool, just as it had been then, and the Manhattan skyline sparkled across the water. "I have something to ask you," James said, his voice unusually serious as they reached the spot where they had stood a year before. Morgan's heart began to race as he took both her hands in his. "What is it?" Instead of answering immediately, James reached into his pocket and dropped to one knee, producing a small velvet box. Inside was a vintage emerald ring, elegant and unique. "Morgan Curtis," he said, his voice steady despite the vulnerability in his eyes. "This past year has been the happiest of my life. You challenge me, support me, and make me a better person every day. Would you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife?" Tears filled Morgan's eyes as she nodded, too overcome for words at first. "Yes," she finally managed, pulling him to his feet. "Yes, absolutely yes." As James slipped the ring onto her finger, Morgan reflected on the journey that had brought them here, from strangers sharing an elevator to partners sharing a life. All because she had smiled at the serious man in the expensive suit, and because he had finally found the courage to ask her out. Their wedding, 6 months later, was an intimate affair held in the garden of James's family home in Connecticut. Only close friends and family were invited, with Penny serving as Morgan's maid of honor and James's younger brother as his best man. Morgan wore a simple but elegant gown, and James couldn't take his eyes off her as she walked toward him on her father's arm. Even Mr. Curtis, who had been skeptical about his daughter's career choices for years, had been won over by James's evident respect for Morgan's professional accomplishments. They wrote their own vows, promises of partnership, respect, and enduring love that moved many guests to tears. When the officiant pronounced them husband and wife, their kiss sealed not just their marriage but the remarkable journey from elevator acquaintances to life partners. At the reception, James surprised Morgan by announcing the establishment of a new Meridian Initiative, a mentorship program for young editors from disadvantaged backgrounds, named in honor of his grandfather, but inspired, he said, by Morgan's passionate belief in giving new voices a chance. "This is your doing," Morgan whispered as guests applauded the announcement. "Don't try to give me credit. It's both of us," James insisted. "Your passion reminded me of why I got into publishing in the first place, to make a difference, not just a profit." As they danced their first dance as husband and wife, Morgan thought about the morning ahead when they would once again share an elevator ride at Meridian Publishing. No more pretending not to notice each other. No more maintaining professional distance. Just two people who found love in the most ordinary of places, an elevator that traveled from the 40th floor to the lobby in exactly 97 seconds. "What are you smiling about?" James asked as he guided her around the dance floor. "Just thinking about tomorrow's elevator ride," Morgan replied. "Our first as husband and wife." James's eyes crinkled with amusement. "Should I still just say morning, or can I kiss you now?" "Definitely kiss me," Morgan decided, standing on tiptoe to demonstrate. 2 years later, Morgan sat in her office at Meridian, now the highly respected head of the fiction department, reviewing the quarterly publishing schedule. A knock at her door made her look up to see James standing there, a rare visit to her floor. "Have you heard?" he asked without preamble, his expression a mix of excitement and nervousness. "Heard what?" Morgan set aside her papers, intrigued by his unusual demeanor. "The Harcourt acquisition is final. The board just approved it." James entered the office, closing the door behind him. "It's the biggest expansion in Meridian's history." Morgan stood to embrace him, knowing how much work he had put into the acquisition of their smaller competitor. "That's wonderful. Congratulations." "There's more," James said, still looking slightly anxious. "With the expansion, I'll be traveling more, at least for the next year while we integrate the companies." Morgan nodded, understanding the demands of his position. "We'll make it work. We always do." "The thing is," James continued, taking her hands, "I don't want to be away from you. Especially not now." "Why especially now?" Morgan asked, puzzled by his emphasis. James smiled, reaching into his pocket to produce a small gift box. "Because of this." Curious, Morgan opened it to find a tiny pair of baby shoes nestled inside. She looked up at him in confusion, then sudden understanding dawned. "The results came back," James explained, his voice thick with emotion. "You're pregnant, Morgan. Dr. Ellis called while you were in your meeting." Morgan gasped, her hand flying to her stomach. After months of trying for a baby, the news was overwhelming. "We're having a baby," James nodded, tears shining in his eyes. "We're having a baby." Their embrace was fierce, both laughing and crying at once. When they finally separated, James wiped a tear from Morgan's cheek. "So you see why I can't be traveling all the time," he said softly. "Which is why I've made a decision. I'm promoting Gerald to handle the Harcourt integration. I'll oversee it, of course, but from here. No extended trips." Morgan was touched by his commitment. "Are you sure? This acquisition is your baby too, in a way." "There's no contest," James said firmly. "You and our child come first. Always." 7 months later, they welcomed James Edward Calloway Jr. into the world, a healthy boy with his father's blue eyes and his mother's determined expression. As Morgan held their son for the first time, with James beside her, his arm protectively around them both, she marveled at how completely her life had changed since that fateful elevator ride. "He's perfect," James whispered, gently touching his son's tiny fingers. "He is," Morgan agreed, exhausted but happier than she had ever been. "Though he seems to have your stubbornness. 20 hours of labor," James laughed softly, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "Poor mama, but worth it, right? Completely worth it, Morgan confirmed, gazing down at their baby. I was thinking, maybe we should institute a take your child to work day at Meridian, in about 6 months or so when I'm ready to come back. Already planning your return, James teased gently. Take all the time you need. Your department isn't going anywhere. Morgan nodded, grateful for his understanding. I know, but I miss it already in a way, though not as much as I thought I would. That's because you have a new priority now, James said, looking at their son with undisguised adoration. We both do. As they settled into parenthood, Morgan and James found a new rhythm to their lives. Morgan took 6 months of maternity leave, during which James adjusted his schedule to be home more often, sometimes bringing work to their apartment so he could be present for baby milestones. When Morgan returned to Meridian, they implemented a family-friendly policy that benefited not just them but all employees with children. The Calloway policy, as it became known, included flexible hours, on-site childcare, and extended parental leave. The initiative was praised within the industry as progressive and humane, further cementing Meridian's reputation as a publisher that valued its people. Little Jamie, as they called their son to distinguish him from his father, became a regular fixture at Meridian, charming everyone from the security guards to the board members. By his first birthday, he was toddling through the halls, his joyful babbling a welcome contrast to the usually serious atmosphere of the executive floor. On their 3rd wedding anniversary, James surprised Morgan with a weekend getaway to the Berkshires, leaving Jamie in the capable hands of his grandparents. As they sat on the porch of their rented cabin, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of gold and purple, Morgan reflected on the journey that had brought them here. You ever think about how different our lives might have been if you hadn't gotten on that elevator that day? She asked, leaning against James's shoulder. All the time, he admitted, his arm tightening around her. Sometimes I wonder what took me so long to speak to you. All those months of just saying morning when what I really wanted to say was you're the most fascinating woman I've ever met. Morgan laughed, turning to look at him. And to think I just thought you were being polite. I had no idea the great James Calloway was working up the courage to ask me out. Best decision I ever made, James said, echoing her words from years ago. Asking the beautiful woman in the elevator to have coffee with me. And I never expected to say yes, Morgan mused. I had this rule about not dating at work. Thank goodness you broke it, James said, leaning down to kiss her softly. For both our sakes. As they sat together, watching the stars appear one by one in the darkening sky, Morgan thought about all that had followed that simple yes to coffee, a whirlwind romance, a partnership of equals both at home and in their professional lives, and now, a beautiful son who combined the best of both of them. I love you, she said simply, the words carrying the weight of their shared history and the promise of their future. I love you too, James replied, his voice warm with certainty. Always have, always will. And as they sat together under the stars, Morgan knew that sometimes the greatest journeys began with the smallest steps, or in their case, with a chance encounter in an elevator and a smile that had changed everything.